After the divorce papers were signed, I didn't go home. Not because I couldn't, the keys still worked, the lease still had my name on it. But the idea of walking back into that house felt like stepping into a museum of lies. Every coffee mug, every throw pillow, every stupid refrigerator magnet from a weekend trip we enjoyed. It all felt staged now, a set piece. So I got in the car and drove. No direction, just a vague pull away from everything. It was late October. The trees had turned that sharp, burnt orange, the kind of color that only shows up right before things die for the season. I watched the highway stretch out in front of me, endless and quiet, with the sun bleeding through low clouds. My playlist had ended an hour ago. I hadn't noticed. I wasn't sure how long I drove before I saw the exit sign. Just a bent metal arrow pointing toward an old logging town I'd never heard of. No chain restaurants. No strip malls. The kind of place that forgot how to keep up with the world. It felt like somewhere I could be invisible for a while. That's how I ended up at the Cedar Pines Motel. It sat just off the main road, half swallowed by overgrown weeds and a crooked wooden fence. The neon sign flickered uncertainly. Cedar Pines, the missing letters hanging by their last screws. There were maybe 5 rooms on either side of a gravel lot, all with identical chipped doors and screen windows that looked like they hadn't shut properly in years. I almost kept driving, but something about the stillness stopped me. Inside, the front office smelled like mothballs and burnt coffee. There was a space heater buzzing in the corner, and a dusty clock above the reception desk that read 2:17, though I doubted it was accurate. Behind the counter stood a woman. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, dark hair tied back in a loose braid, denim jacket with the elbows frayed. She looked up from a paperback novel and met my eyes without flinching. "You look like you need to sleep, not talk," she said. I gave a tired half-smile. "That obvious?" She didn't return it, but her expression softened. She reached under the counter, grabbed a key, a real one, not a plastic card, and slid it across. Room 7, quieter on that end. And then, before I could pick it up, she leaned in slightly and said, soft as a confession, almost like she wasn't sure if she wanted me to hear it, "That's the room people tend to end up in when they're trying to forget something." I froze. Not because it scared me, but because it landed too close to the truth. I didn't ask what she meant. Didn't ask how she knew. I just nodded, took the key, and walked out. Room 7 sat at the far corner of the lot, beneath a bare light bulb that buzzed with a swarm of moths. The door groaned when I pushed it open, revealing a narrow, dim room that looked like it had been trapped in amber since the mid-90s. The wallpaper peeled at the corners. The carpet was damp in one spot. A twin bed sat in the center, draped in a scratchy mustard-colored blanket that smelled like time and dust. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I dropped my bag on the chair, the only chair, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat there, staring at the wall like maybe the answer to everything was buried inside the cracks in the paint. Eventually, I reached for my phone. Not because I had someone to call. I didn't. But silence had become too loud, and scrolling through an old phone was the only way I knew how to avoid myself. I went through the usual routine. Deleted voicemails, ghost text threads, photos of places I didn't want to remember. Then I saw it, a photo that didn't belong. It was buried in an album I hadn't opened since spring. A grainy image, slightly tilted, like someone had taken it from across the room without trying to be discreet. It was Haley, my ex-wife. She was sitting in a downtown bar I knew all too well. The red leather booths, the dim amber lighting, the place she always swore she only went to for networking events and client drinks. She was wearing the green wrap dress I bought her for our anniversary. I remember saving up for that dress. Took me 3 weeks to make the decision. I had it delivered, wrapped it myself, even wrote a note. And there she was, in that dress, smiling, sitting on some guy's lap. His hand was resting just above her knee. Not possessive, not aggressive, just casual. Familiar. Like they'd done this 100 times. Like my spot had been filled before I'd even noticed it was empty. The timestamp? 3 days before she asked for the divorce. I remember the day she told me we were growing in different directions. That's how she phrased it, like we were houseplants in mismatched pots. She said it with this strange calm, like she was already somewhere else in her mind. I asked if there was someone else. She shook her head. It's not about another person, she said. It's about finding myself. I had believed her. When I sent the photo to her that night, just the image, no caption. She didn't reply for 6 hours. And when she did, it wasn't an apology. It was a monologue. She told me I was paranoid, that I was projecting because I didn't want to take responsibility for my role in our failing marriage, that I'd always been too observant in ways that made her feel trapped. She said the photo was taken out of context and that she was allowed to have friendships I didn't understand. She never mentioned the hand on her leg, never addressed the timestamp, never said the man's name, just spun a web of explanations so tangled that by the time I got to the end, I almost forgot why I had sent it in the first place. But sitting there now, alone in a roadside motel under flickering lights and peeling wallpaper, the illusion cracked. I looked at the photo again. Not the man, not the timestamp, just her face. Not just the smile, the way she tilted her head toward him, the way her shoulders relaxed. It was the posture of someone who'd already made peace with betrayal. Someone who had stopped pretending even before I caught up. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. Room 7 was quiet. Too quiet. And yet, somewhere beneath the silence, I kept hearing her voice in that last voicemail she left me. The one I had deleted but couldn't forget. I'm sorry things turned out this way, she'd said. I really am. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I didn't think she meant it. Not then. But in that moment, lying on a creaky motel bed with nothing but shadows and silence to keep me company, I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't apologizing for leaving. Maybe she was apologizing for not leaving sooner. I didn't sleep that night. Room 7 might have been the quietest one, but it didn't matter. My mind wasn't interested in rest. I lay there on the stiff mattress, hands folded across my chest, watching the shadows from the parking lot flicker across the ceiling like ghosts pacing a stage. Every creak of the walls, every buzz of the heater, it all blurred into the background while my memory did what it does best. Rewind. Not just to the photo, not just to the divorce, but further. I started tracing things backwards, moment by moment, red flag by red flag. And the more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Haley's shift hadn't happened overnight. That was the lie I told myself for a long time, that we just drifted apart, that she just fell out of love, that these things happened without anyone really meaning to cause damage. But the truth was messier, more intentional, and I had seen the signs. I just didn't want to name them. There was that summer she got the promotion. At first I was proud, genuinely. She had worked hard, stayed late, taken calls at all hours. I used to bring her coffee during those marathon work weekends, thinking I was being supportive, thinking that meant something. But then the late nights turned into overnights. The client meetings became less scheduled, more spontaneous, and she started guarding her phone like it held nuclear codes. Once, I passed by the kitchen and saw her laughing at something on her screen. When I asked what was funny, she tilted it away from me and said, "Just a meme from Lindsay at work." Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. But the wall went up after that. She stopped leaving her phone charging on the nightstand, started showering with it in the bathroom. Notifications came through with names I didn't recognize, initials, sometimes just emojis. And every time I asked, I got the same rehearsed line. "It's work stuff, Logan. You wouldn't understand." She was right. I didn't understand. Not at the time. Then there was the perfume. Haley had never been heavy-handed with scent. She liked subtle, earthy notes, sandalwood, bergamot. The kind of perfume that lingered gently and only caught your attention in passing. But somewhere in the last year, that changed. She started wearing something bolder, sharper, and it clung to her skin for hours after she got home, as if she'd only just stepped away from someone else's arms. I remember asking once, jokingly, "New perfume? Smells expensive." She smiled, tight-lipped, and said, "A client gifted it to me. I should have asked which one." I didn't. The shift in how she dressed came next. Not overnight, again, just enough to be noticeable. Pencil skirts instead of jeans. Blouses instead of hoodies. She stopped borrowing my flannels. Stopped lounging around in sweats. Every outfit felt curated, like she was dressing for an audience that wasn't me. When I asked why she was so dressed up on a Sunday morning just to grab coffee with the girls, she rolled her eyes and said, "I like looking good. Since when is that a problem?" It wasn't. At least it shouldn't have been. But it was the way she said it. Defensive, like she was preemptively arguing against a charge I hadn't made yet. I kept telling myself not to overthink it. That was the phrase I leaned on, overthinking. As if caring too much was a flaw. As if paying attention was the problem. I let her shame me out of my instincts. That's the part that eats at me most. I even remember the moment I almost confronted her for Real. It was last spring. She said she was going to a weekend workshop in the city, a marketing conference, something or other. She showed me the itinerary on her laptop. A PDF with corporate logos, a seminar schedule, even a hotel address. It looked legit. She packed a single suitcase, took the train, texted me a photo of the hotel lobby once she got there. I believed her. But 2 days later, I took her car in for an oil change. The mechanic pulled a hotel key card from the glove box. Not from the city she claimed, but from a beachside resort 3 hours in the opposite direction. I stared at that key card for a long time. When she got home, I showed it to her expecting what? A confession? A breakdown? At least a pause? Instead, she didn't even flinch. "Oh," she said, glancing at the card. "That must have been from Sarah's birthday trip a few months ago. I guess I forgot to take it out." She said it so casually, so easily, I actually questioned my own memory. "But you told me you didn't go to that," I said. She blinked. "What? Yeah, I did. I just didn't want to make a big deal out of it because I knew you had a lot going on that weekend." It didn't make sense. None of it did. But I let it go. I let it go because I wanted peace more than I wanted the truth. And that was my mistake. I'd rather have lived in an uneasy truce than confront the war bubbling under the surface. I thought maybe if I just stayed quiet long enough, if I gave her enough space, she'd come back to me. That the distance was a phase. That marriages had dips and we were just in one. But the truth is, Haley didn't need space. She needed separation. And I had already been replaced. I remember the last birthday we spent together. She came home late, said she got caught up at the office. No gift, no card, not even a store-bought cupcake. Just a half-hearted apology and a quick kiss on the cheek. We sat on the couch, watching a show she barely paid attention to, and I told myself not to bring it up. Didn't want to sound needy. Didn't want to ruin the night. But I went to bed alone that night. She stayed up texting someone. I heard the buzz of her phone, soft but rhythmic, every few seconds. Each vibration like a knock on a door I wasn't allowed to open. I used to know her schedule down to the hour. Used to finish her sentences. Now, I couldn't even guess where she was half the time. And when I asked, she made me feel guilty for asking. "You never used to be this controlling," she said once. When I questioned why she left the house at 10 p.m. to go clear her head. Controlling. That was the word she *p*nized most. She used it like a shield, a way to end every conversation before it could begin. And I let her, because part of me wondered if she was right. If I had been too needy, too observant, too unwilling to just let her be whoever she wanted to be. But now, lying on this motel bed with the ghost of her perfume long gone, I could finally see it. It wasn't about control. It was about trust. And how she'd slowly, methodically dismantled it. Not with dramatic betrayals, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. With every late night, every vague answer, every memory she rewrote after the fact. I didn't lose Haley the day she filed for divorce. I lost her the day I started doubting myself more than I doubted her. I stayed at the motel longer than I planned. At first, it was just for the weekend, time to breathe, to let the shock settle. But one weekend bled into the next. Days lost their structure. I stopped checking the calendar, stopped pretending I had anywhere else to be. Room 7 became my limbo. A place where the past replayed itself so often that eventually, it started to feel like fiction. I didn't call anyone, didn't update my address, didn't explain to friends or family. Truth was, there weren't many people left to explain anything to. Haley and I had spent years building a shared social orbit. Most of those people chose neutrality or worse, silence when the split happened. Nobody wanted to get in the middle. Nobody asked what really happened. They just watched us break from a safe distance and kept their hands clean. And in a way, I understood it. Everyone wants peace. Few have the stomach to watch how it's actually made. The motel staff stopped treating me like a guest by the second week. Claire, the receptionist who'd whispered that strange line to me on my first night, started leaving fresh towels outside my door without knocking. The housekeeper skipped my room unless I asked. No one pushed. No one prodded. It was the strangest kind of grace I'd ever experienced. The kind that didn't require conversation. Still, I knew I couldn't stay frozen forever. On a gray Wednesday, I drove back to the city. Just for the day. I told myself I had loose ends to tie up, practical things, paperwork, logistics. I dressed like someone who hadn't fallen apart. Clean jeans, a button-down shirt. The coat Haley once said made me look like someone with purpose. I stood in front of the mirror for 10 minutes before I left, trying to find a version of myself I could still respect. My first stop was the office, the one Haley and I had co-founded 5 years ago, back when the idea of building something together seemed romantic. We had poured everything into that business. Late nights, savings, dreams. She handled the creative side, I handled operations. It worked for a while. We even won a few local business awards, posed for photos with those oversized checks. We had convinced ourselves that working together would bring us closer. What it really did was give her something to outgrow. I hadn't stepped foot in that building since the day she told me she wanted out. Not just of the company, but of us. She'd handed me a drafted agreement and said she wanted her share cleanly and quickly. Said she needed a fresh start, and hoped I'd respect that. I did. I gave her exactly what she asked for. Now, I was there to sign the final paperwork and remove my name from the few remaining documents that still tied us together. I expected the visit to be mechanical, cold. I expected to walk in, see unfamiliar faces, sign a few lines, and leave with a folder under my arm and closure in my chest. Instead, I ran into Adam. Adam had been one of our first hires. Kind guy, quiet. He used to bring donuts on Fridays and hum old blues songs while fixing printer jams. I didn't even know he was still with the company, but when I stepped into the lobby, there he was, carrying a box of branded notebooks, his ID badge swinging from a lanyard. "Logan," he said, squinting like I was a memory trying to form. "Hey, Adam." He smiled. "Man, it's been a while. Thought you moved to Costa Rica or something." "Not quite," I said, offering a polite smile. We exchanged the usual pleasantries. How have you been? How's work? How's life? Until the topic drifted, as it inevitably would. "You hear about Haley's new venture?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "I heard she opened something. Boutique firm, right?" Adam nodded. "Yeah, over in Atlantic City. Small team. Real modern vibe. It's her and that guy. What's his name?" He snapped his fingers. "Eli. You know him?" My stomach tightened. "Can't say I do." Adam frowned. "Really? That's weird. I figured you'd met. They seemed pretty close last year, back when she was still with us. Remember that holiday party? You were already gone by then, I guess. But I saw them there. Seemed comfortable." He said it casually, without knowing he was hammering the final nail. I don't even remember the rest of the conversation. Something about a new intern, the espresso machine finally being replaced. I nodded, smiled, thanked him, and signed the documents I came to sign. Then I left, got back in my car, sat behind the wheel with my hands gripping it so tightly the leather creaked. Atlantic City. She said she hated that place. Said it was too loud, too fake. I remember her mocking the idea of networking events in casinos, saying they were just excuses for bad behavior. And now she was building a business there. With Eli, a man whose name I hadn't heard until 5 minutes ago. And yet, Somehow, he had already replaced everything I had spent years creating. That was the moment the timeline locked into place. The late nights, the mysterious work trips, the shifts in her wardrobe, the guarded phone, the emotional detachment. Eli had been the plan all along. I was the draft she never submitted, the rough sketch she scribbled over with something new. It wasn't even anger that I felt. Not at first. It was something more muted, like walking into your childhood home only to find it turned into a strip mall. The bones are still there, but the soul's been replaced by something you don't recognize. I didn't call her, didn't text, didn't ask for answers. What would have been the point? Every answer I'd ever gotten from Haley had come wrapped in justification, dipped in self-help jargon, and served with a twist of spiritual enlightenment. She would have told me that people evolve, that sometimes connection isn't meant to last forever, that she never meant to hurt me. And maybe all of that was true, but it wouldn't have changed a thing. Instead, I drove back to the motel, back to room 7, where the bed still creaked when I sat on it, and the ceiling still bore water stains shaped like continents I'd never visit. I took off my coat, lay back down, and closed my eyes. And for the first time in months, I didn't picture her. I pictured me, just me, breathing, alive, free. And that was enough. A month passed after that day in Atlantic City. I never reached out, never looked her up again, never asked mutual friends what she was doing or how she was holding up. I deleted the shared cloud folders, blocked her number, not out of spite but necessity. Every trace of her became a brick in a wall I was building between who I had been and who I was becoming. And each day that passed without a message, without her shadow falling across my life, felt like sunlight finally warming the parts of me she'd left in the cold. I didn't expect to hear about her again. Not directly, anyway. But the universe has a strange way of tapping you on the shoulder just when you stop glancing over it. It came from Maya, of all people. A mutual acquaintance we'd known through work events and dinner parties. Maya was one of the few who hadn't taken a side after the divorce. She was diplomatic in a way that felt neutral, not cowardly. So when I saw her name light up my screen on a Tuesday afternoon, I hesitated before answering. "Logan," she said, her tone cautious. Hey, I replied, unsure where this was going. "I know this is out of the blue, and you don't owe me any response, but have you heard about Haley?" The question hit like a glass of cold water. "No," I said slowly. "Why?" Maya exhaled. "She's not doing great." I didn't say anything. I didn't know if I should. "She opened that firm with Eli, right?" she continued. "The boutique design thing in Atlantic City?" "Yeah, I heard." "Well, it's basically collapsed." That word hung in the air like smoke. Collapsed. I waited. "Apparently," Maya went on, "he pulled out, took some clients with him, told her he couldn't see the business scaling, and didn't want to invest any more time. She's stuck with the lease, the staff, and a reputation that's kind of fraying." "Didn't she have investors?" "Not really. Just private savings and a couple of people who were more interested in Eli than her. She tried launching a few campaigns to drum up attention, but they didn't land. I think she overestimated how much of that brand was built on him." A long silence followed. I could hear cars passing on her end of the call, maybe people walking by. I pictured her leaning against some city cafe wall, unsure whether she'd said too much. "I thought you should know," she added gently. "Not because I think you'll celebrate it, but because I know how much it cost you when she left." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Thanks, Maya." We hung up not long after. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't ask if Haley was still with Eli, or if she was living alone now, or if she had finally admitted to anyone what really happened. I didn't want to know. Whatever story she told herself about why things had fallen apart, that was hers to manage. Mine was already being rewritten, sentence by sentence, in a different tone entirely. But later that night, I couldn't help imagining the version of her that now sat behind a half-empty desk in a half-rented office space. Maybe she still wore that green dress, the one from the photo. Maybe it now hung limp on her frame, less a symbol of seduction and more a memory of how far she'd fallen. Maybe she stared at the door, waiting for someone to walk in and fix everything. Or maybe she had stopped waiting altogether. I didn't feel joy. I need to say that clearly. I didn't dance around the room or fist pump, or tell myself that karma had finally done its job. There was no movie scene moment, just a strange, muted clarity. She had built her escape plan on illusion, and illusion doesn't weather well. I remembered something she once said during an argument, one of the last big ones. We were standing in the kitchen, tension thick enough to slice, and she'd shouted, "You never let me become who I was meant to be." At the time, I thought that meant I had held her back, that maybe my steadiness, my desire for simplicity, had become a cage. I internalized that sentence, replayed it like a mantra, used it to rationalize her coldness. But now I saw it for what it was. She hadn't wanted freedom. She wanted momentum. She wanted to be swept up in something fast, shiny, and loud enough to drown out her own uncertainty. And Eli had offered that. He didn't just give her attention. He gave her acceleration. But acceleration without direction only leads to a crash. From what Maya said, Haley had tried to call in favors. Former clients, past colleagues, anyone who might help salvage the firm. But no one bit. Not because they hated her, but because they'd seen the instability, the rushed ideas, the empty pitches dressed up in branding jargon. People had started to notice the cracks I'd lived with for years. Her boutique firm went under a few weeks later. I didn't ask how Maya knew. Word travels fast in small industries, especially when the fall is public. I was sitting on the dock outside the workshop when I found out. Claire had brought over coffee that morning, left it on the step without a word, like she always did. I had the mug in my hand, legs dangling over the edge, sawdust still on my jeans. The sky was low and gray, the kind of weather that makes everything feel heavier. But I felt light, not because she had failed, but because I finally understood something vital. Her collapse had nothing to do with me. I wasn't the reason she left. I wasn't the reason things went wrong. I wasn't the safe choice she needed to outgrow or the anchor holding her back. I was just the man she stood beside when she was still figuring herself out. And when she decided she didn't like what she saw in the mirror, she blamed the lighting, not the reflection. It's easy to demonize the person who breaks your heart. It's even easier to romanticize the collapse, to believe that when they fall, you rise. But that's not the truth. The truth is quieter. It's the feeling you get when you stop looking over your shoulder. When the part of you that still expected an apology finally goes silent. When you realize their journey was always going to unravel, because it was built on borrowed time and borrowed love. That night, I pulled out the last photo I had of us. The framed one from our engagement, the one I hadn't yet thrown away, though I didn't know why. I looked at it for a long time, not to mourn it, but to finally let it go. I set it face down in a drawer, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up. The motel never asked me to leave. No extended stay form to fill out. No awkward nudges about checkout policies. I paid every week, cash in an envelope, and in return, they gave me what no one else had in months. Silence without suspicion. I stayed in room 7, not because it was particularly comfortable. It wasn't. But because I had made a kind of peace with its broken heater, its uneven floorboards, and the faded painting of a lake that hung crooked on the wall. That room had seen me unravel, and it had stayed still while I did. Claire remained a mystery, and I preferred it that way. She was always there. Not in a dramatic way, just present. She worked the front desk most evenings and sometimes into the early hours, like she didn't trust the night to behave on its own. She never pried, never made small talk unless I did first. And yet somehow, she always seemed to know when I needed something before I realized it myself. The first note showed up on a Tuesday, folded beneath my receipt for the week, written in neat block letters. You're not broken, just between chapters. No signature, no flair, just those words and the quiet truth humming underneath them. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the note like it had a voice. I didn't take it as flirtation. It didn't feel like that. It felt like the emotional equivalent of a hand resting gently on your shoulder. just enough pressure to remind you you're not invisible. A few days later, a thermos of black coffee was waiting outside my door when I stepped out to breathe the morning air. The cup had my name written in Sharpie on the lid. No explanation, no expectation. After that, I started paying attention. Claire would pass me in the lot and simply nod, never overstepping, never doing more than what felt natural. But I noticed the rhythm of her, how she timed her presence. On the nights when I returned late, after long walks or quiet drives just to get out of my head, she was always still behind the desk, half reading a paperback, half watching the world outside. She never asked where I'd been. She never looked disappointed when I said nothing. That was what made it feel safe. One night, maybe a week after Haley's business collapsed, I couldn't sleep. I had been lying awake for hours, turning the ceiling into a confession booth. Around midnight, I got up, grabbed my hoodie, and stepped outside. The parking lot was empty except for the wind nudging some fast food wrappers along the curb. The office light was on. Claire sat behind the desk, a single lamp casting a cone of soft gold across her notepad. She looked up as I walked in but didn't jump or smile like she was glad to see me, just a nod. I stood there for a beat, then said, "Do you always work this late?" "Sometimes," she replied. "Depends on the guests. Depends on the night." I nodded, unsure what else to say. She glanced toward the small shelf near the window. "Coffee's fresh, if you want." I did. We didn't talk much. I sat in one of the chairs near the vending machine, sipping from a mismatched mug with a chip on the rim. Claire went back to her notepad, sometimes flipping through what looked like receipts, other times just doodling in the margins. It wasn't conversation. It wasn't connection. It was something simpler, something quieter. After maybe 20 minutes, she looked over and said, "You seem lighter this week." I blinked. "Do I?" She nodded. "Not happy, but less haunted." I smiled, just barely. "Yeah, maybe." She didn't push, just nodded again and went back to her work. The next morning, another note was tucked into the receipt envelope. "There's no glory in surviving what breaks you, but there's honor in not letting it define you." I didn't know if she wrote those for everyone or just me. I never asked, but they started to feel like small anchors, tiny weights that reminded me I was still here, still human. It wasn't romance. I can't emphasize that enough. Not even a hint of it. There were no lingering glances, no accidental touches that meant more than they should have. It was far quieter than that, and maybe more rare. She didn't want to fix me. She didn't ask for details. She just made space. And in doing that, she gave me something I hadn't realized I needed: permission to exist without performing. After a couple of weeks, I started leaving my door cracked open during the late afternoons. Sometimes I'd hear her outside delivering towels or helping another guest. And if she passed by my room, I'd offer her coffee from the old drip machine I kept on the desk. She always accepted but never stayed long. "Lot to do," she'd say, even when there wasn't. But in that 5 or 10 minutes, we'd sip from mismatched mugs and trade fragments of stories. Never too deep, just enough to make the air feel less heavy. I learned that she used to work at a community library before the funding dried up. That she had once driven cross-country on a dare. That she hated small talk but loved crossword puzzles and 80s movie soundtracks. She asked me nothing in return. I volunteered what I wanted. And the strangest thing happened. I started looking forward to those 10 minutes. Not because I needed them, but because they reminded me I was capable of enjoying something again. I didn't tell her about Haley. Not directly. But one night, after she mentioned how strange it was to see someone read a book twice, I said, "I used to think I knew someone inside and out. Turns out I was only ever reading the cover." She didn't reply, just nodded slowly and said, "Covers are designed to sell, not tell." That line stuck with me. Later that week, I found a third note inside the envelope. "There's no shame in starting over, only in pretending you never needed to." I folded that one and tucked it into my wallet, and I still carry it, because that, I think, was the turning point. Not when I healed, not when I got over the betrayal or stopped replaying old conversations, But when I realized I didn't need to be seen to be worth something, that I didn't need an audience or validation or a partner to make sense of who I was. I just needed time, and someone who didn't demand a reason to stay. Claire never asked me where I was going when I eventually told her I'd found a small workshop to rent near the bay. She just handed me my last receipt and a cup of coffee. As always. No note this time. Just a quiet smile and a simple line. "You'll do fine." And I believed